Okay, so first question, have you always wanted to work in the IT industry slash how did you get involved in the IT industry, if that makes sense?
Yeah, sure. So no, it's funny because as a youngster, so I was came from a military family, and I was the only one of my siblings that didn't go into the military. And when I was little, I thought I wanted to be a pilot like my brother, or sort of in the Secret Service like my dad. And so, it was for me, it was I was really going off piste, and I thought, and then when I went to uni, I went for political science, thought I might want to go into law, did a little, side trip into architecture because I thought that was really cool. So I did a lot of experimenting and got into IT mostly by accident. I was working in retail, and they moved me into the corporate head office and said, hey, we've got this little IT project that we've got to get going. Would you mind helping us? And that was it. I was hooked. So sort of from my early 20s, I was in and then didn't escape.
Okay, to make that, hopefully you didn't want to escape, but no, in terms of starting with that little IT project to where you are today at Rackspace, can you give us some idea of that journey, how you've ended up where you are?
Yeah, of course. Gosh. So I started out in very much kind of the project management side of the house. So looking after programs and projects. And that little project that I mentioned was actually deploying store hardware and systems into 200 locations across the US. And that was really exciting because it gave me the opportunity to see across the whole aspect of IT. So again, hardware, applications, networking and data, and so on. So that kind of gave me a taster. From there, I got much more heavily into kind of the infrastructure side. So wound up working in data centers, working with, big compute, that kind of thing. And then went from there into applications. I did a stint in architecture and design. I did a stint then into data warehousing and kind of as they started to develop the notion of big data. So kind of gone all through the different practices in IT. But from a sort of a career path, went through project and program management and then into kind of IT management. And so sort of took that path up to my current role. So today I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Rackspace in EMEA. And I have to say for my current role, it was really important for me to have had that background in each of the practices so that I could really get that end-to-end view of what it takes to deliver IT to a customer. And it's probably worth noting too, in my career, I've been really varied in the companies that I work for. I started out with a large company. I went to a very small startup. That was really exciting and interesting. Never knew if you were going to get a paycheck. Moved into I ran my own business for a little while, and I always joke that I've never worked so hard to earn so little money. And I've been on both the customer side and the supplier side. So it sounds like an awful lot of jumping. It really wasn't, but it was just interesting to kind of be able to, again, see that broader spectrum.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm always intrigued because I sort of cover a lot of technologies, although my background sort of storage and data centers. Mm-hmm. And I'm always, I won't say amazed, but say surprised that people that work in particular discipline often have very little knowledge of any of the other IT disciplines. So would you say it's a good idea for people, clearly if they're qualified in a particular topic, subject, then, that might be what they want to pursue, but where possible, do you think it is a good idea in the IT industry to get that breadth of coverage so you do understand, if the software people are giving you a hard time about your network, at least you understand a bit about what their problem might be as opposed to just, going in that little vertical, line, whatever.
I think it's absolutely crucial, and I think it's crucial for two reasons. One is it makes you a much more well-rounded, individual. You understand soup to nuts what's going on. And when you're talking to a customer, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer, it really gives you a sense of how do I solve this problem or how do I help you from end to end. So I think it's really important from an understanding perspective. On the flip side, from a career development perspective, IT is changing so much. I mean, I think if I'd have just stayed in the type of infrastructure I was doing, I probably wouldn't have a job today. So if you kind of look at how IT is moving quickly now, and if we look at things like quantum and AI and ML, right? All of that, that's kind of the IT of the future. And so you have to be super flexible, and I think you have to understand all different aspects. It's really funny because my son just started his uni career this year, and he's going into IT, and I keep saying to him, don't just focus on code development, don't just focus on one thing. I'm like, go take a philosophy course, go figure out how to, converse with other people and do presentations and communicate, because it can't just be about one element of the tech.
And just quickly, in terms of where you are at Rackspace, did you arrive to do that, the CIO role, or did you spend some time there before you got promoted to your current role? Just interested in that.
Yeah, so I joined sort of with the intent of that being my path. There was someone else in the role when I first came here. And so I was kind of the next level down, as it were, but doing essentially the same role. And then that gentleman left, and I moved pretty rapidly into the role I'm in now. So within sort of 4 or 5 months of me arriving, which was a little bit sooner, I think, than anyone had planned, but it was kind of a happy accident.
Okay, and in terms of you've clearly had a busy career, shall we say, and you've explained the sort of the variety you've come across. In terms of some of the challenges you've experienced, would you say they mostly fall into the category of just normal, career business challenges, or have you been aware at times that the fact that you are a woman in an industry that is perhaps male dominated, although that's beginning to change maybe, has some of that been a factor? Just thoughts as to when you've had challenges, what might have been the reasons for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that I think it's kind of half and half. So certain challenges, and especially like early in my career, I felt like a lot of times it was more because of my age. Like, oh, she can't possibly know what she's doing. She's only in her early 20s, And unfortunately, that sort of still exists, and it really shouldn't. And then I think as when I reflect as I get older, some of it was definitely because of my gender. And a lot of times how it manifests itself is, you're in a room and you're being literally talked over, or people aren't sort of taking your suggestions seriously, but the next person says it, but says it in a slightly different way. And suddenly it's the best idea you've ever heard. And so, it's challenges like that can be very, very frustrating. I have to say, I've never been turned down for a job where I would reflect and say, oh, well, but I think that once you're in a role, it takes women a lot longer to prove themselves. And, when you're trying to build a career, there is no substitute for hard graft. I would say, my car is pretty much the first in the parking lot, in the morning, and pretty much the last to leave every night. You've got to put in the work and the hours. I think it takes us probably a bit more time to prove ourselves and prove our value, perhaps.
And do you find that slightly surprising, bearing in mind the IT industry, certainly in more recent times, shall we say? I mean, the digital natives, there's a whole bunch of people, male and female, that are used to all this technology, have great ideas, and perhaps the workplace should be more accepting and, say, wow, these people have got, they know it all, they were brought up with it, whereas the older generation has perhaps had to learn, as you're referencing ML and AI, that's probably well outside their comfort zone, whereas youngsters are probably, it's meat and drink to them. Just any reflections on why that might be, I suppose, or should it be?
Well, we should be changing as an industry, absolutely, but I'm not sure that we are. I think we're still kind of in this sort of weird neutral zone where we haven't quite kicked over into the right place yet. But, it's not just IT. It's really funny. So I was talking to my son's girlfriend the other night at dinner, and she's a vet student. And we were talking about, her course. She goes to the Royal Veterinary College, one of the best vet schools in the world. And the vast majority of her co-students are female. But she was saying, but the men in that industry get paid significantly higher than her female cohort. Now, these are young people, about to enter the workforce. And it just feels really wrong that should still be a factor. And I mean, talk about digital natives, as she's going through school, all the work that she's doing, all of her coursework rooted in IT, all of the things that they're doing, they're going to be using robotics and everything. Is just fascinating. And that's just a part of her job. So, if we think about careers of the future, they're going to be deeply rooted in IT. And, at what point are we, this is where I probably get on my soapbox a little bit. are we going to make this right? And are we going to just simply get to the point where we're equal pay for equal work? She's in her early 20s, and I could sense her frustration already before she even hits the workforce.
And you say we've reached this sort of neutral place. So however little would you, since you started in the workplace, would you at least say there has been a level of improvement when it comes to equality? But it from what you're saying, there clearly needs to be that sort of, if it's a quantum leap or significant change, just to get over the legacy of men being better paid and all the rest of it, just to where you're somebody, whether you're male or female, whatever your background, you get paid the right salary for the right job.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a tough one, because I feel like there's, in IT, there's still very much an old guard, no doubt about it. And those folks are probably starting to hit towards their career twilight years, their retirement years. And then you kind of got the up and coming groups. And, when I look at our grad students coming in, I'm seeing a much healthier mix of female and male. And I'm seeing a lot more females coming in with technical degrees, engineering backgrounds, things like that. So definitely, I think there's hope for the future, but it's going to take these guys and girls probably, another 10 years to mature into the leadership, into that middle management and senior management leadership layers. So we've got to help these folks get, into these positions, get them, recognized for the value that they bring, and again, treated fairly. And in order to do that, we've got to give them really equal opportunities early on in their careers, get them onto the same, or offer them the same training courses, certification courses, early career advancement, so that, they're tracking at the same pace. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm just, something's occurred to me. There are clearly what we'd call traditional IT companies as well, I won't name the names, and then the industry is characterized as well by all these exciting startups, some who come and go and some end up being like Rackspace there. So I know you're not a startup anymore, but obviously when you first came into the industry, it was a breath of fresh air. And would you say there's a difference in attitude? Shall we say that more traditional vendors perhaps have a more traditional attitude to staffing, whereas some of the startups are not hung up on that? It's just, as I say, if you've got great ideas and you know what you're doing, we'll employ you, and off we go. Is that fair to say?
I think it depends. So, again, I worked in Silicon Valley for a while, and there's no doubt about it that there is a tech bro culture. You've read about it. It exists, trust me. And so, there can be that in that space. Equally, I would say that I've experienced, I worked for a startup that was actually at the time predominantly women, and it was a really successful business. And it had women who were very senior in engineering, careers and engineering roles. And when I look at Rackspace, I'm really, really proud. My, 3 of my top leaders, and especially leaders in very technical roles, are women. And so they're out there, you can find them, you can get the right balance, but you've got to be thoughtful about the way that you recruit and plan and hire. It's not going to just kind of happen. And so a lot of that comes down to challenging your recruiters, challenging HR to make sure that the job descriptions are written in such a way that women will apply for them, and that they'll kind of make it through the early cuts. And so, there's a lot to do, but I think there is definitely progress. There's definitely progress. But I think if you're a young person formulating a career right now, it's really about finding a good fit, because the beauty of a big IT company is they've got the resources to help with training. They've got, lots of mobility where you can travel and really build a kind of a varied career. Sometimes in startups, though, you really learn to be a jack of all trades, which is super helpful. So there's, you kind of have to reflect and say, well, what do I want out of my early career, and where am I best going to get it?
Okay, and in terms of, you outlined there some ideas and thoughts as to what needs to be done, but could you formalize that perhaps a bit more in terms of how you think the industry, you say that there's more that needs to be done, and I think you referenced earlier that maybe it's in another 10 years. Will that just happen organically because everyone's aware of it and we'll gradually get there? or what would you like to see? I mean, you mentioned obviously the HR and the way maybe they frame the job roles, etc. But what other practical things do you think need to be done to improve the balance, the diversity?
Yeah, I think there's a push and a pull. I think that from a pull perspective, we have to get into schools and get into areas with children much earlier. So, I can't tell you the number of times when I was younger that it was like, oh, she's just bad at math. Well, actually, I wasn't. I just had a really crappy teacher my first couple of years, and it was just sort of this assumption that, oh, we should be much better in English, The fact is today I use practical math all the time. So I think it's just, it's getting into schools early and really sort of making sure that we have the courses that are available that excite young people. They have to relate to their future careers. I mean, if you think about it, the way we teach kids today is not that different from 100 years ago. We really need to figure out how to change the game in education. And I think some areas are doing much better than others. But if I look at, the stuff, as my kids kind of come out of their, junior schools and into university and just beyond, they're not necessarily graduating with those life skills or those abilities, to be highly performative in a tough job right away. So anyway, start really, really young. I think that's the kind of the pull. And then the push is, I think that, again, we need to be much more deliberate about making sure that, we're super inclusive in the workforce. And that's not just gender, that's all different aspects of society. And, when I look at kind of the makeup of our company, I want to be sure that we've got all of the right voices at the table that reflect basically who our customer is going to be, because that's the only way we're going to develop products and services that speak to everyone. So I think that there needs to be, a little bit of, I don't know what the word is, but, I think there needs to be a little bit of agitation to get, to a point where these companies are acting in a much more equal and inclusive way for all.
And does that surprise you slightly, in the sense that it makes complete sense? If you're running a business and you're trying to sell to a load of customers, depending on what you do, I guess, but for most people, they want to be as inclusive as possible. They don't want to limit themselves to particular audiences, and therefore it makes sense to have within your company that diversity to which you're trying to sell. Do you think it's a surprising sort of business own goal that more companies haven't worked out, that it's just makes it's common sense to have all manner of people within an organization?
Yeah, it's a no-brainer, and research has proved it again and again and again. Companies who are shown to be more inclusive, to have a more diverse workforce, outperform. They outperform in the stock market again and again and again. So, I think we have to start looking as, and as we rise into kind of more, leadership roles where we can make more decisions like that, it's time to really look at that and be very deliberate and thoughtful about the way that we're filling roles, recruiting people, and how are we pipelining, again, graduates into our company.
Again, in terms of folks that might be considering moving into the IT space, whether it's they're coming to the end of their educational sort of path and looking what career to pursue, or I know a lot of people, we heard about the Great Resignation and people reevaluating what they want to be doing. Like any sort of thoughts or advice for people, as I say, whether it's the youngsters or people maybe wanting to retrain, as to the best ways to go about finding out whether IT is for them, or what the opportunities might be?
Yeah, I think it's to be really, really flexible and really, really curious. I think I read a few weeks ago, like the shelf life of most IT specialist skills is down to about 2.5 years. And that's only going to accelerate as things, again, like quantum computing and AI and ML start to, I'll say, kind of take over the base level, computational areas of IT, right? Then it becomes really about being thoughtful. Can we ask really good logical questions of computers and be sure that we're getting the right answers back? Can we analyze data and uncover hidden biases? And so So when I look at the IT career of the future, you're going to have to be really open to changing, to continuously being curious and learning new skills, and to looking at different layers of the stack. I think at some point we're going to hit an area where code, I would call it like typical code development is no longer really necessary, where we've already got that. All the code that needs to be written has been written. So now you're into object-oriented design and things like that. So it's just really thinking, a few steps ahead of where the industry is going and deciding what works best with your personality. But the key to a sort of a successful career in IT in the future, I'm absolutely adamant, is being willing to change paths, to be very, very flexible.
And just as a matter of interest, do you think the sort of corporate social responsibility angle is another growth area for the industry as it's aware of its wider impact in society, or do you think that's already well understood and it's a sort of, without wishing to sort of downplay it, it's a sort of subset of other activities, and therefore if you know how to code, you should also know that your responsibilities around sustainability, etc. Or do you think there is a role for specialists and a growth in those specialists?
No, I think that's an emerging area of IT. I don't think we've even begun to tap the opportunity there. And I think there's kind of, I'll call it table stakes, right? A good IT company has table stakes in that they're active in the communities that they serve. They're trying to do no harm. They're working to limit their footprint on the, on the environment, right? That's kind of like every company should just do that as part of existing. But then I think there's this whole new area that we can open up and develop as technology changes. There's so much good that can be done in the world, and there's so many pioneering things that we can do to make sure that we're meeting the UN sustainability goals and so on. So I think, again, if I were restarting my career now, that's an area I would be super interested in, is how can we use some of the computing and intelligence power that we're developing to make the world a better place. And I think you're going to see an explosion in that in the next decade or two.
Okay, and maybe just as we sort of finish, it would be good to have if you're given a sort of a wish or two, somebody comes along and says, I'll give you a couple of wishes how you could change the IT industry for the better. Anything particular? I mean, you might have a very long list. It might be difficult to limit to one or two, but any particular sort of bugbears or things you think are very obvious that would be great to implement or improve within the industry?
I think in general, the industry will often say, oh, we're super innovative, we're super fast, we can pivot on a dime. But the reality is that it often takes a lot longer than people would imagine it should. And so to me, I think, kind of putting our money where our mouth is and really being able to change quickly, to follow where the technology is leading us in a responsible way. And to being able to respond to what society needs and what our customers need. I would love to be able to accelerate that. I think most transformation programs take far longer than they probably need to or should. And when we get that right, I think you'll see the way that companies operate catch up to the technology advances that are coming along the line.
And in terms of achieving that, I mean, is that more of this, but your collaboration is beginning to become understood as important? We talked earlier about all the different things you've done. The silo approach is gradually, we're being told, being replaced by more collaboration. Is that the secret to what you're saying, that people can be much more dynamic if they're all working together, as opposed to working in a sort of linear approach and not much interaction?
I think it's that it's also making sure that you've got really inspirational leadership who can kind of set the vision, They know how to tune the company to achieve that vision, and they're very much willing to lead from the front, right? I think that's a big piece of it. And then I think it's, again, developing a workforce that's multidisciplinary, that's flexible, that's kind of willing to take on new things and try something, even if it does mean, hey, we might fail, but we'll learn something from it and we'll move on to the next thing. I think that's going to be really key to making that happen.
Okay, well, it's been fascinating to chat to you, and there's been some really great insights. So Liz, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.